Welcome back to Zine Cuisine. So today I'm posting part 2 of the North Carolina trip. This is the Andrew Neal talk at the Triangle Comic Creators Network night. He was in full scholarly mode. It was very wonderful. We got a lot of footage, so I'm literally going to let this run just because there's so much information. So here we go.
Andrew Neal. Hey.
Hey.
How's it going? That's me. And this is my comic, Meeting Comics. I have been drawing this as a comic strip for about 2 years now. What I do is I draw a 4-panel comic strip. I put it on the internet 3 times a week. Then I collect it in mini comic form every 2 months. This big. I self-publish these, put them together myself. And the cover here is the cover to the book collection that just came out from Ad House folks. So that's where I am with that. That's the Ad House logo. And here is a brief introduction to Meeting Comics, even beyond what I just gave you. I don't really have a script so much as a bunch of prompts to remind me what to talk about. So it's rated R. I don't see any kids in here. It's not technically rated R by anyone, but I just wanted to have that in the slideshow in case someone brought a bunch of children and was worried about that. It's mostly language. There is some other stuff as well, but it's mostly the fact that people who speak to each other speak with language that is apparently not allowed in the world. Before Meeting Comics, here's something I did in 1988. I've drawn comics pretty much all my life. This is a fine cartoon from Phillips Falcon, from Guy B. Phillips Junior High, just on this very street from the newspaper. You can see that I was an excellent draftsman in junior high. The lines are confident. You know, it relied on the joke, right? But I was doing stuff like this. Then, and if you don't get the joke, sorry, it's Ray Charles and Charlie Brown, and it's not a great joke. But I think it was solid for 7th grade. Here's an excerpt in the 90s of a comic diary that I kept for probably about 4 years. I wanted to get better at making comics. I went to school at UNC Greensboro, and because there was no comic program locally, I just got a degree in painting and printmaking. This is one of the few panels of the many comics that I drew that didn't incriminate anyone else I knew in anything. So this is just relating that I got a job at a porn store, which happened in 1996. If you can't see it, there's narration at the top. It says, the good part about summer is that I finally got a job. Phil and Amy got me a job at the porno store. And then it's 2 panels, one of which is me looking at a box saying, reading it, because it's in quotes, someone's in the kitchen with vagina, and you've got to be kidding me. That was a real title they had there. So I also did this. I owned a comic book store for a long time. So my time in comics hasn't just been in making it. In fact, while I owned a comic book store, I didn't make a lot of comics. I got way too busy, and I put almost all my creative energy into trying to sell the things. I did at times make some, and usually there was an exercise involved, like 24-hour comic day that we hosted. I made a couple of those in addition to staying up with, teenage kids who were making them. But again, most of my creative energy during this time went into selling comics, but still, I was around them, I was reading them constantly. Once I sold the store, which was 6 years ago, I decided to jump back into making comics. This is a little excerpt of one that I made. This is kind of slicker looking than the stuff I do now. I drew this on my computer because my drawing muscles and confidence had pretty much atrophied. And I liked using digital tools to draw at this point because it gave me the opportunity to constantly undo and redraw. So these are the first couple panels of a comic I drew. It was 24 pages, I think. Each one was 1 panel. If you can't see it, it says, I was haunted from a very young age. My friends didn't understand how I coped. A visiting friend offhandedly mentioned that maybe a cat would be good for someone in my situation. Then it's a comic about a cat coming into the house and chewing up all our ghosts. I threw this thing on Tumblr, and after never really using Tumblr, the right person reblogged it, and I got 800 or 1,000 hits or something, and that was kind of fun for the dopamine, but it wasn't, it wasn't a big reception. I made a mini comic of this and I gave it to friends. This is the next one that I did along the same lines. I did this a couple years later, another 24-page comic. So at this rate, I was basically making a page a month. And this is some narration from that one. Both of these were the same. They were weird situations with matter-of-fact narration. And this one is from the point of view of this lady who's married to this guy, but this monster thing is always hanging around. And it's just a story about that. So again, another tiny little thing where I did one panel to a page. And each of these I kind of forced out of myself over the course of a couple months so that I would have something to take to an event to show people. I gave copies of them to friends who were in the comic industry. Hopefully some of them would get back to me, and a few of them did. And they said, hey, this is actually pretty good, which is of course the not the greatest compliment, but it's good. I mean, who do you expect your buddy that's never drawn a comic before to do okay? I took it as a pretty good compliment. I also, after that, decided to try something longer. This is a short excerpt from a comic I knocked out 35 pages of and then abandoned, called Teenage Gender Neutral Turtles. And it was inspired by the fact that I saw a viral video of parents giving their kids non-gender conforming toys and then taking video of it. And I did not have a problem with the kids having these toys or enjoying them and preferring them, but I had a problem with the parents using their children to show the world how wonderful they were. So this is actually the turtles, all with potentially, you don't know how their names are gendered. But the story was about this guy who bought a bunch of toys to give to his kids to make these videos, and it went from there. And I did pages of these, put them online. Like I said, I got through 30-something pages. I put them up 8 pages at a time online, on a Tumblr, shared them elsewhere, and eventually ran out of steam because I wasn't getting a lot of response. They didn't work well for Instagram, which at the time was not what it is now, but was becoming the main way that people looked at images online. I gave up on it, and about 2 or 3 months later, a bunch of people said, hey, why'd you stop doing that? And I said, why didn't you tell me you were reading it? But that was the end of that. All right, so the next thing I did basically was meeting comics, and this is how it started. I was in a meeting at my job, and we'll say after the meeting, at lunch, I started doodling, and it was a direct reaction to the comic, to the situation that they were in. And this is what I drew. This was kind of like the things I showed you before, which was just a thing happening and some narration. The apocalypse started when I was in a meeting. We'd all been chastised for using our cell phones at work. There's one buzzing on a table. So none of us had a link to the outside world during the meeting. There's a dude on fire. And when we learned what had happened, we all felt like we had missed out. And someone looking at their phone and saying, "Aw man," and hashtag FOMO. So I drew this not with any plan of having a book published 2 years later, but because I was just in a meeting and it felt like the world was happening outside and not in the meeting. So that's how this started. About a month later, I drew another one in a meeting. This was very directly inspired by the end of the meeting. I worked with someone in this room, and I'm not going to mention who the offender was, but this is really obviously just a comic about how when a meeting ends, what you should say is nothing. You should let it end and not go on to compliment the people who ran the meeting and then speak for 10 minutes. So, there wasn't much of a punchline to this. It was just an opportunity to get my feelings out there in the world. And again, both of these I threw on Instagram, and some people liked them, and that made me feel good. So I thought maybe I'd draw some more. This is the last one that I drew as a direct result of a meeting. I don't remember exactly what inspired it, other than I wanted to flip a table and I didn't. So this is just you know, Jimmy, we're out of time, so we'll see your new presentation next. He says, God damn it. Then, okay, Jimmy, let's talk this out. That was about a B- table flip. I didn't really buy it. You're improving though. So obviously the joke there is it was all part of a training thing. It's not a great comic, but it was my first one of these where I was thinking in terms of flipping kind of a workplace comic around and making it weirder. It's not that, well, I mean, the first one had an asteroid crash into Earth and people burning, but you know, whatever. That's basically a real meeting. So that was the first few that I drew. And after that, I started thinking about them ahead of time. I started drawing them on lunch breaks. Eventually I started drawing them at home because I started drawing them with things other than whatever I had at work. It kind of evolved into a full-fledged comic that I had plans for, a cast for. Everyone in the cast was just a person that I drew to fulfill part of a joke at first. So I didn't make up anyone. I didn't have a character sheet. A lot of the time I will see young cartoonists online who have pages and pages and pages of drawings of a guy who they've never drawn a comic about. They just have plans and they feel like they need to have everything worked out ahead of time. And I think it's possible that in some cases you do need that. I think if you're putting together an intricate crime heist and you need to know all the twists and turns at the right time, and you need to know who's involved with it, that's great. But if you're drawing a 4-panel comic about some people at work, it worked out pretty well for me to just draw people and then let them turn into characters. So we're gonna meet the cast. Get it? Like meeting comics, meet? Oh, never mind. This is Val, who is far and away the most popular character in the comic, which just happened. She was just a character that I drew. At first, really, she was a bun, hairstyle, and glasses. And this is a pretty early one, so we don't see a lot of her personality in this one. It's just her disciplining a couple of young workers, sending them to sensitivity training, and then bringing in Coach Wilson at the end, who says, don't think I'm gonna go easy, boys. I used to teach social studies. I don't quite get this one, but I still think it's funny. I guess her personality is starting to poke through in this one because her cup in the second panel says, don't fuck with me. This is one still relatively early, but she's starting to get a little more personality. And this is where we start to see that I'm drawing about people at work, but I'm not in any way constrained by reality. So she's saying, why is that here? And the guy with her, who we'll meet in a second, says, that's a service animal. I believe this is a psychiatric service dog who helps Trunt with his PTSD. Trunt has a shirt on that says Trent. That becomes a short-lived running gag that I then abandoned. She says, oh my Lord. Don says, she's your response monkey. She says, no, she's feigning. Hypomanic episode pig. Don't knock it, Val. Maybe there's an animal that could help you. Then she's flying in on Pegasus and says, I took your advice into consideration. Here's another one, which is Don and Val hiring people. This one I included mainly, hey, because I like the joke, which is really dark and horrible. I drew this at the time when there were a lot of government shutdown things going on. So this is an example of me bringing current events into the comic. The first part is the interview. Thanks again for coming in for this interview. It's been illuminating, sure thing. Then we see the line of government employees, including Smokey Bear, outside the door, because the Forestry Service had been among those losing employees. We have a long line of government employees who want a job, so we need to keep this short. So here's your final question. What is your greatest weakness? And the guy says, I guess I just work too hard sometimes, while he's shooting up. I like that one. A lot of people think it's too dark, and it might be. All right, so here's Don. He is Val's immediate boss, and basically when he started, he was just, all I knew about him was he had glasses and forehead wrinkles. I just liked, I liked drawing that. So that's kind of where his personality came from, and I think that's totally okay to just let something evolve out of what you've drawn. So this is him, and I feel like this, I have fantastic news, everyone, probably is me liking Futurama a lot. but because that's pretty similar to what Hubert Farnsworth said in that show. Anyway, I have fantastic news, everyone. The company made a huge profit this quarter, and upper management decided to put some money back in all their pockets. He pushes a little button that goes boop. Meet the robot that will help budget your food stamps. And a robot comes in saying, buy generic cereal. Whoa, I turned it off. I guess I got scared. So here we have an example of the two of them getting together, and this is where I first started kind of showing their friendship, relationship. This was a 4th of July comic, and this was kind of maybe even the first one where I decided I was going to start acknowledging time passing in the real world. So Val is hanging her arm over Don at a 4th of July party and celebrating, behaving inappropriately. In the third panel, we've got Don's husband, Terry, saying, Don, I know you and Val have a special relationship, but I wish you asked before inviting her. In the last panel, it's just Don saying, inviting her, and her basically molesting someone's grandpa. Inappropriate, but again, started to show the various personalities. Here's another one with them. All right, folks, I know you want to get out of here because it's Purge night. I really like the Purge movies, and I actually think the first Purge is one of the great movies of the last 10 years. But anyway, I thought it would just be really funny to have Don just happily acknowledging Purge night. Before you go, I have a surprise. I got us all matching Purge masks. And Val said, gasps with pleasure. Okay, now put them on. 3, 2, 1. Val says, wait, I didn't get one. And in the last panel, they're all Val masks. Oh my God, they're beautiful. So this was this was stuff that was helping me figure out their personalities. This wasn't me knowing who they were. It was me saying, oh, okay, if she did that, she can do this. So I just kind of slowly built up these characters into who they were. And, you know, I think my first thought for this one was I was going to draw some guy Xeroxing his butt on Purge night. You know, he was taking advantage of the fact that he could do crimes in a really boring way. But then the first Purge came out, and in fact, that was addressed directly in the script. Not Xeroxing one's butt, but why is it always killing? It's because the government made it that way. Anyway, I thought this was funny. All right, this is Kevin. His first appearance in the comic. He is, I guess you could say I sort of had an idea for his character, though I didn't know it was going to recur. My idea was there's an anarchist at a protest punching a Nazi, and that's what happens. So his phone rings, he answers it while he punches the Nazi. The phone says, I'm pregnant. He pulls off his hoodie, he has a tie underneath, busts in the door in an interview, says, tell me your benefits. They're just barely good enough to make you compromise your entire belief system. He says, I'm in. So that was basically me writing a joke, which then inadvertently became a main character. Like here he is a little while longer, where I was starting to draw more hair on him. And this was the introduction of his wife, Ellie, and his kid. Honey, I'm home, haha. Look, Bertrand is daddy. I thought it would be funny to have their kid named after Bertrand Russell. Which I do a lot of stuff like that. I think about people's names. And in fact, this is one of the rare cases where somebody has a name in their first appearance. I didn't know who Kevin was for a long time. None of these main characters had names. I just eventually at some point have somebody say, Val, something like that. Kevin, I keep hearing about the things your company's mixed up in. Me Too payments, unfair labor practices, unsafe factory conditions. It's very disturbing, you know. I know, it's been weighing on me. Mom says we can move in with her. We can find jobs that don't make us hate ourselves, and she can watch Bert. I don't know, maybe we can cancel Netflix. Or I can keep trying to change things from the inside. That's more along the lines of what I was thinking. So this was about me and everyone I grew up with. You know, you get older, you compromise. Sure, you know, you used to stay in a punk house with 15 other people, but now you have people who depend on you. And you change because you have to, or you don't. And that works out even worse. So, you know, that just kind of, it's not directly inspired by any particular events in my life, but, you know, I think a lot of the Kevin jokes kind of come from my own coming to terms with the fact that everybody turns into something else as they get older. Yeah. First of all, the internet. So what I do with these is I take photographs of the comics as I draw them. I put them on Instagram. The reason these are square is because Instagram is a square, and more people look at Instagram than anything else, at least in my internet world. I also put these on Twitter. I put them on my Facebook page. I put them, that's it at this point. I tried some other things. I tried Reddit, but I'm too old to quite understand Reddit, and I don't use it on an ongoing basis, so I've stopped using that. So this is an example of a comic as I put it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Like I said, I literally took photos of what I had drawn. You can see some sticky note parts where I had, you can kind of see it on the TV. You can see barely that there's another dialogue bubble behind each of these, and that I decided to edit it a little bit. And I just threw that right over the panel lines. This guy, who turns out to be a relatively major character, whose deal is that he shows up like this at mayoral ribbon cutting events and cuts the ribbon before the mayor. I drew on a totally separate piece of paper because the first time I drew him in this panel, it was terrible. And at this point, I had gotten to the point where I wanted things to look a certain way. So for the sake of this, all I did was throw it on there. And you can even see here where I drew the guy first, then cut out a ribbon from sticky note and then outlined it around it because I needed to get rid of the lines on there. This was me kind of just floundering around, figuring out how is this going to work. And then there was a crappy vowel underneath down there at the bottom, which I replaced with another one. And I find that there's a lot of value in putting stuff out there like this. It lets people see process. Maybe they don't see every step, and frankly, if I took pictures of every step as I did this, it would take forever. I'm trying to knock these things out 3 times a week, and I have a day job, and I'm also married, and I'm trying not to be a terrible husband drawing comics all the time. So it's a way for me to get things out there, but also maybe have a style. It's not purposeful, it just kind of happens. But you know, people recognize it as something I'm choosing to do. All right, next I put out mini comics. Here is the comic that I put out in which that strip appears. It's about 5.5 inches, which is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper like this, and then the bottom's cut off. So much as they are squares, because Instagram is a square, they're that size because that's the cheapest way to print these things and put them together myself. So in the context of this as a comic creator meetup, my advice is do it the cheapest way possible. If you don't have a lot of resources to put into something, don't design something that's going to be a 400-page full-color graphic novel. Otherwise, it ain't ever going to exist. This is, I forgot this was here. I was going to let this run while I talk, but now we can let it run now. Look at that. I made an animation. So this is all, the covers to many comics I've published so far. 11 issues of Meeting Comics, and one spin-off entitled 320 Shades of Greg, a Meeting Comics erotic thriller, which is much more Meeting Comics than it is erotic thriller. But technically, my wife asked me while I was working on it, is this really going to be an erotic thriller? And I said, I don't know, tell me when you read it. She read it, she was like, I think it technically qualifies, but it's mostly jokes. I was like, yep, that's what I was going for, good. Anyway. So that's what I've put out so far. I'm currently working on the 12th one. I try to design every cover so that they look really differently. The first one existed in this form because I realized before I took a trip to Heroes Con in Charlotte, I've drawn enough of these to make a mini comic. I think I'll put one together and take some to my buddies. And I just designed it by kind of tracing over in Clip Studio, which used to be called Manga Studio, some of the drawings that I had done before and assembling the characters on the cover. It was kind of last minute and fun. By the time I realized I wanted to keep doing this, I decided I wanted to actually design these covers in a more thoughtful way and make each one look kind of different. So I started doing that. So they look very, very different than what's on the inside. And on the one hand, that is maybe a bait and switch for somebody who likes the cover and the full color shiny art and everything, but doesn't want to see a black and white strip. But I mean, you know, they can see that by picking it up and looking and seeing it's not what they want. I think it's really fun to do this, to design in a completely different art style for the cover than for the strips. It works a totally different part of my mind. It gives me a chance to kind of noodle at things and do things in detail. And it gives me a chance to try to think about a different type of design than I do in the comics themselves. I've even gotten to the point where the last one there, number 11, is kind of a counterpoint to number 6 here. It's obviously the same suit, obviously something that's happened in the storyline, and you know, some people like the really simple ones better. This is definitely the most popular one for me to sell to someone at a zine festival if they don't know my stuff and just want to pick something up, because they tend to like the graphicness of the cover. On the other hand, there are people who like the ones that I just filled up with stuff. And then there's people who like the one with a car on it, and they're like, there's no cars in here. I just, you know, there's that as well. So, all right. Anyway, here's that very comic I showed you before for the mini comic. Now, within the context of the mini comic that I published myself, I realized with issue 2 that I actually had the opportunity to, as long as I'm putting it together myself, I can do 4 pages of this thing in full color and actually show some of that process I was talking about. I was kind of inspired by art books, specifically ones that Chip Kidd had put together for Peanuts and Batman, the animated series. Basically, I really like art books that show the process. There are also this big line from IDW and probably other publishers now that showcase the original sized comic art that went into making comics. You can see all the whiteout, you can see the paste over stuff. I like that stuff, and this was a way for me to kind of pay homage to that within my little mini comic. And you know, I could eat another 20 cents on one page and still sell the comic for the same amount, and it was enough to sell more comics, so it all worked out pretty well in the end. Now, I did edit this a little bit. You can't see the bubbles behind these anymore because I wanted it to be legible. And I also shrunk these guys, moved them both into the panel so it didn't look like a piece of paper thrown into it, because there are certain things that just don't read in print the same way they do in a photo. So I actually did some editing. So in a way you could say this is an affectation, but to me it was just keeping the spirit of the process while making it more readable. Then for the book, which just came out, there's the cover again, I was not able to do colored pages interspersed throughout the book, because when you are manually stapling together a mini comic and you're willing to take the time to file in a page in the right place in color and staple it yourself, that's one thing. But when you're having a full book published, you have to have the whole thing printed in color if you're going to do it that way. So I just edited all the color strips into black and white strips, and in some cases that meant I edited away the sticky notes because some of them were that, and then a few of them, because I started doing this, I started using color panels that were kind of essential to the punchline. I just had to edit them so that it made more sense. All right, why a 4-panel gag comic? Number 1, I like comic strips. I grew up reading Peanuts, Bloom County, The Far Side, all that stuff, and I'm clearly pretty inspired by that, I think. So, you know, it's fun to me to be working in a medium that I enjoy, that maybe would have worked in something like an alternative news weekly back when those still ran comics, but still it's pretty different than what you see on the page. Second, every time I draw a page, I finish something. That's very important to me. If I had set out to draw a 160 page book and had been drawing it all alone on my own and never showing it to anyone, I guarantee you I never would have finished the thing, because I know myself. Being able to finish a full comic 3 times a week, which is what I do with these things, what I started doing with these things once I decided I was doing them on an ongoing basis, it lets me feel like I'm done 3 times a week, and I put them out there for people to see. That means I have to be able to write a joke that works in 4 panels, and every now and then there's a stinker, but that's okay. That's what I will take to get something done 3 times a week. Also, there's room to experiment and grow my style. What I mean by that is that if you finish a thing, and then you move on to the next thing, and you want to mess with it, the problem of consistency isn't as big as it is in one long, ongoing story. So, even within a full graphic novel, people grow. They grow into their art styles. You figure out what's going on, unless it's the second or third one that they've done. There's going to be some change in the art, but it's less jarring to me to have these things enclosed in 1 page at a time. And here's an example. This is the first comic that I ever drew, and this is one that I drew last Friday. So in this one, I drew it with whatever. There's probably like a skinny Sharpie that I found at the meeting. This one is with a brush pen and gray marker. It's showing up blue on this monitor, but it's just a gray marker, so that I can give a little more tone to it. And it's, I'm a little looser with it. There have been periods where I would draw the background characters with a pen so that I could get the detail in, and I eventually just kind of settled in over the course of a couple of years to I'm drawing everything with this brush pen. It gets kind of sloppy. I know what they look like now. I can put the detail in if I want to. This is a joke about dresses with pockets, which, it's mainly here to show this is literally the most recent one I finished, but it's also there because I've overheard a lot of women who work in the library with me having talked about why don't ladies' clothing have pockets, and the whole joke is at the end she's got all her stuff in these giant pockets that are dragging out of it on the floor behind her. I thought that was funny. It's a little grotesque. That is my presentation, ending with pockets. If you have any questions about the process, I'm happy to answer them. About anything else, I'm happy to answer it. I kind of wanted to make this more about the thing I make so that if you have questions that occur to you, go for it. But I didn't want to do, here's how I do the pencils, here's the pen I use for the next thing, here's the marker, here's how I take a picture with my phone, here's how I scan it and clean it up. I'm happy to answer that, but that's a boring slideshow. My website is meetingcomics.com. You can find all my social media on there.
So that was the Andrew Neal talk. He was in full scholarly mode. Anybody who knows Andrew knows that is just he loves to talk about stuff like comics. And it was just really enjoyable because we got good insight on how the characters were developed and what goes through his mind, his vast mind on when he's creating these characters. So, what do we got next? The next one's going to be the Chesky interview with, and then we were going to try to get Gregory Pepper, but couldn't really talk to him, but we have a actual future planned date with Gregory Pepper when he gets back to Canada, and he's going to show us his zine collection, so I'm really excited about that. If you like this content, go ahead, give us a subscribe. Give us a nice little thumbs up. Give us some comments. If you like what you're seeing or if you want us to cover certain topics, please comment below. It means so much to us, knowing that you enjoy what we're creating, you enjoy what we're doing, and you're also big zine fans. We love y'all. Big hearts. So, until next time, bon appetit. And the next episode will probably be posted later on tonight. I really did not want to break it up like I did, but there was so much information.